Skateboarding. I remember partaking in this particular extreme sport as a kid, and completely failing at it. Anyone like me who was born in the mid to late 90s remembers back when skateboarding was all the rage. Every kid on the block had a skateboard, but none of them, I repeat, none of them, knew how to even ollie the damn thing. 10 out of 10 of those kids, including me, were inspired by none other than the Tony Hawk's video game franchise. This series has had its ups and downs, its birth, death, and eventual resurrection via remake back in 2020, but no matter what game you view as the apex of the series, it has certainly left its mark on skateboarding as a sport, particularly the first couple of games, all of which were either made or had ports for the original PlayStation. For this review, I'll be taking a look at all 4 PS1 Tony Hawk games. Yes, that includes the 4th game's downport too. How many of you knew that even existed? So without any further delay, let's take a trip back to where it all started. There were skateboarding games prior to THPS1, but none of them really broke sales records or had that much of an impact. Skate or Die was mildly successful on the NES, and there was also Street Skater, which comes across as a prototype for what would become the Tony Hawk formula. But it wasn't until 1999 when the skateboarding genre would truly take off. This one had the man, myth, and legend himself, Tony Hawk's involvement. He would actually receive beta builds of the game and report back to Neversoft on what to add and improve. And when it finally hit store shelves in September of '99, it completely smashed expectations, going on to be one of the best-selling titles on the PlayStation. And for the time, it's easy to see why. Fast arcade gameplay set to a brilliant punk soundtrack, all set in levels so well produced, they genuinely feel like they've always existed. But nowadays, opinion is more divided between those who consider it an all-time classic and those who deem it poorly aged. I've seen quite a few mainstream publications even declare it a poorly aged relic, and I hate to say this, but the worst people you know just made a good point. THPS1 is quite frankly a vexatious experience in hindsight. While this game might have controlled like a dream back in 1999, it was almost immediately outclassed once a sequel came along. With almost 10 Neversoft sequels having built upon the formula, THPS1 is an arduous affair to say the least. Granted, that still means it's infinitely better than the flaming dumpster fire that was Pro Skater 5, but out of the first 4 games, this might be the weakest in terms of gameplay. I can't begin to tell you how many times I unintentionally bailed throughout my playthrough, not to mention the lack of manuals, which is guaranteed to throw most people off nowadays. It feels like a prototype relative to the efforts that succeeded it. The level design fares much better, with almost every single level appearing in future titles as a bonus. Every level has a unique design and palpable atmosphere. I'm a bit mixed on the actual objectives, but I can't really think of a truly bad level, with the possible exception of Downhill Jam. My personal favorites would be Minneapolis with its nighttime setting and more open feel, the mall's downhill goodness, and the school, which is apparently set in Miami but lacks any of the city's iconic palm trees that would otherwise indicate a Floridian setting. There is also the iconic warehouse, popular due to nostalgia, but otherwise fairly mundane. Still a great level nonetheless. The soundtrack, while tiny by today's standards, is still a fantastic collection of punk rock rebellion, featuring the likes of Dead Kennedys and Suicidal Tendencies, to the more pop-punk tinted tracks, such as the anthemic Superman by Goldfinger, which has remained the unofficial theme song of the franchise ever since. Sadly, the soundtrack finds itself butchered on the N64 port, thanks in no part due to the use of cartridges. There's no doubt that the Tony Hawk's franchise would introduce thousands of kids to amazing punk rock acts, myself included. Overall, a strong debut for a series brimming with amazing soundtracks. Sadly, an iconic soundtrack and level design can only go so far. When it comes to actually playing Tony Hawk 1, what you are left with is a rather bare-bones experience bereft of many features this series is now known for. No character creator, no park editor, even the simple act of manualing to link tricks is nowhere to be found in this game. THPS1 may have been the golden standard in '99, but it's below even bronze these days, and is only really worth experiencing now for historic and nostalgia purposes. I'm feeling about a 5 or 6 with this game. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater's megalithic sequel would arrive just 1 year later, back when yearly sequels were actually viable and didn't exist for the mere purpose of maximizing profit, something that EA and Activision sure love these days. And unlike the debut effort, 2 actually holds up halfway decently. I'm not the nostalgic hipster beard who will put THPS2 on a pedestal as the so-called best game of all time, but it's certainly one of the better games in the Tony Hawk series, and mostly deserving of its iconic status. Every aspect is improved, and I do mean that. In fact, the only thing in my view that THPS1 did better was the menu music, and that's just down to personal preference. With thrice the tricks, even more palpable level design, and customization that was out of this world when it was new, THPS2 is a certified hood classic, and a title that's been remade countless times to various degrees of success. I fucking loved this game as a kid, and while later titles have dethroned 2 as my favorite in the series, it's still fun to come back to all these years later. One thing that immediately caught my eyes was the ability to play as myself. Well, sort of, that is. Later games have some of the most robust character customization ever, allowing the player to create a human version of my leather-bedecked persona, but THPS2 is fairly limited in that regard, and trying to make something that resembles me is virtually impossible. But that's made up for by a park editor that I'd say still holds up. You've got so many pieces at your disposal, and the possibilities are almost limitless. You can even change the aesthetic as well, which results in different textured park pieces. One of my favorite things to do is start off with the small park template and build a park composed exclusively of punji pits, resulting in a never-ending series of player deaths. But the actual levels themselves are better than ever. We start off in an air hangar similar to the warehouse in 1, but with 3 major sections, 2 of them unlocked by performing grind tricks. School 2 is what many consider the magnum opus of Tony Hawk levels. It's even got a poopy Easter egg tailor-made for immature man-children like me. And we've also got Marseille, New York, Venice Beach, and so on and so forth. All of these levels are pure perfection, meticulously crafted to be as memorable as humanly possible and fun to play. It's no wonder that this game seems to have its levels reused more than any other title in the series. All of that is benefited by improved controls, featuring manuals, twice the amount of flip tricks, and so many wicked cool specials. It's still got a little bit further to go before the series would nail the controls, but even now, it's easy to pick up and play. THPS2 absolutely curb stomps the first effort on that factor alone. The soundtrack, depending on who you ask, might have a bit too much pop punk and nu metal to be worth listening to nowadays, but fuck those flannel-bedecked hipster detractors. 35-year-old men who give high praise to Ariana Grande records have no right judging other people's music tastes. THPS2 has such a great blend of 90s rock and hip-hop that just fits the atmosphere of every level as you pull off sick combos. Rage Against the Machine, Anthrax, Power Man 5000, Styles of Beyond, and so on. It's still limited by today's standards, featuring only about 15 tracks, but all of them are great. Very evocative of the year 2000, but still amazing. THPS2 is a masterpiece. I'd still argue that Underground is the series' apex of creativity, but 2 is definitely the point where Tony Hawk nailed it, and would kick off the golden age of the series that lasted until Thug 2 or American Wasteland, depending on who you ask. I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on this one. Tony Hawk 3 would be this series' first entry on the PS2, and it totally succeeded in that regard, with fully realized controls, immersive levels, and better customization. THPS 3 is one of the best skateboarding games ever made. But the PS1 was still hanging in there back in 2001, especially among the lower classes, so a PS1 downport was made. You would probably expect it to be a mediocre dud not even worth touching, but quite the opposite actually. Tony Hawk 3 on PS1 is really only marginally worse than the 6th gen versions, thanks in no part to it using the engine and assets from Tony Hawk 2. Carrying on from the greatness of Pro Skater 2 really only meant refining the formula and gameplay, and that's exactly what 3 does. Now we can revert on half-pipes to link never-ending tricks with massive scores, and we can also move the camera around too. It's rather superfluous during heated moments, but a neat addition nonetheless. Neversoft were in the midst of a level design renaissance in 2 and 3, and it's hard to name a single bad level in either game really. We start off in the Foundry, which continues the trend of industrial-themed levels set indoors to start off our skating journey. The earthquake-struck streets of LA, the downtown madness of Airport, a snowy Canadian skate park. Every single level in this game is a fucking masterclass in level design. I can't even name a worse level. They are all fantastic. Sadly, the customization here in the PS1 port has seen absolutely no new additions, aside from some new park backgrounds. This is the only place I'd say the PS1 version feels rushed, which is saying a lot. Downports of next-gen titles have the potential of being absolute shit pieces. Take the 7th gen version of Black Ops 3 for example. That's just taking a shitty game and making it even worse. THPS 3 is an example of a downport made with love and care, not just for the sole purpose of cashing in on the poverty crowd. THPS 3 continues Neversoft's winning streak of amazing soundtracks, although the PS1 version has about half of the songs missing. Still, it's got Motorhead and Ramones. What else can I say? This iteration of the soundtrack might be my least favorite so far, because this is where some obvious radio rock started creeping in, such as the pop-punk nu metal hybrid of Alien Ant Farm. No soundtracks are perfect though, seeing as Tony Hawk 1+2 features Machine Gun Kelly in its playlist. 3's inclusion of Motorhead's Ace of Spades still makes it an A-tier level score though. That's one of my favorite songs of all time right there, though it makes me sad that Motorhead would never reappear in any future Tony Hawk soundtracks. Pro Skater 3 for PS1 is a downport made with love. It does carry over the remaining bits of clunk from Pro Skater 2, but that can easily be overlooked. This is probably the best skateboarding game on the PS1. The next gen version is objectively better, however, so if you have to choose any version, get that instead. Nonetheless, I'd rate this version highly as well. I'm feeling an 8.5 out of 10. Pro Skater 4 is the weak link between the 2-minute trilogy and the Underground titles. Compared to both camps, it sees itself routinely ignored comparatively speaking. It did lay the groundwork for the magnum opus that is Thug, and I do have to applaud it for that. As much as I love the 2-minute trilogy, even as a kid, I found it restrictive and even frustrating. So 4 is a revolutionary title in the series despite being fairly underrated. But how does it fare on the PS1, in 2002 no less? Well, not great. This port is a very superfluous effort indeed, and went almost completely ignored. By 2002, only losers like me were still rocking the PS1, and thanks to that, Pro Skater 4 on PS1 almost never gets brought up. For one, the majority of this game is simply high score runs or combo lines. Animating characters talking and having voice acting to boot was just out of the equation. This is a problem with the levels in all of the PS1 games up to this point, but never more has it been more prevalent. These levels are barren wastelands devoid of life. There aren't even any cars roaming the streets, so it's kinda like playing an empty Gmod map. The level designs themselves are a mixed bag. They maintain some of the personality from the originals, but are heavily downgraded to the point that some levels barely have anything to skate on. Take the London level, for example. It's one of the worst Tony Hawk levels I have ever played. I actually think the Kona level in this version is better than the 6th gen counterpart. I really just love the nighttime setting in Skybox. Many of the fan favorites such as Alcatraz and College are still here, mostly preserved, but we also get an exclusive sewers level, and dare I say, this is an underrated gem of the series. I just love the atmosphere it gives off. Someone needs to make a version for Thug Pro, seriously. Pro Skater 4 on 6th gen has a fairly good soundtrack, although it's still one of the weaker ones of the Neversoft era in my opinion. Unfortunately, the PS1 version has half of the soundtrack hidden as unlockables, and there's no Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden either. Talk about a slap in the face for us metalheads. I'm not even going to really get into the customization this time because, yet again, it's ripped straight from the previous PS1 titles. There is no real reason to play the PS1 version aside from curiosity. This version was a real low point for the series for quite some time, up until Project 8 and Proving Ground were released to complete indifference in the mid-late 2000s. And it would only get worse further down the line when Robomoto got their dirty hands on the series. I'm feeling a 4 or 5 with this version of Pro Skater 4. The Tony Hawk series is one of the best gaming series of all time, despite a plethora of hiccups across its tenure. No motion-controlled bullshit or cynical cash grabs can change that fact, and the first couple of games on the PS1 really were a phenomenon. They got so many kids into skateboarding, and while most of us never even learned to do a kickflip, it did spark a huge interest in the extreme sport nonetheless, and shaped the music taste of thousands. I will say that the PS1 era is slightly overhyped, and I don't agree with those that say that Pro Skater 2 is the best game of all time. Underground is a much better contender for the best game of the series, and hopefully I will get to that in its Jackass-themed sequel one day, but I'll still concur that Pro Skater 2 and 3 are must-plays on whatever system you can get them on, aside from Game Boy Color that is. But if you want a definitive OG Tony Hawk experience nowadays, the recent remake of 1 and 2 is more than worth picking up. That has all of the levels from 1 and 2, with the tight controls of 4 and jaw-dropping modern visuals to boot. Tony Hawk will always be one of my favorite gaming series, and one I will continue to return to until the day I fucking die. Thanks for watching, everyone. It's been fun making these longer videos recently. I've been taking myself a bit more seriously when it comes to making videos from now on, and I'll definitely stick with this format from here on out. If you enjoy my videos and want to support the show, I've recently opened up a Ko-fi page where you can donate to support the show. I've also had plans of promoting a Patreon page, but scrapped those at the last minute. I personally just feel like my channel's not big enough to do that yet. And I also think that the single donation method of Ko-fi works better, but if you guys want to support me via Patreon, I'll consider using that as well. Just let me know in the comments below. As always, this is your local Thrash Panda Slayer, signing off.